Okay, good evening, everybody. It's 6:30 on Tuesday, April 25th, 2017. This is a meeting of the Littleton City Council for a study session. We have an agenda. The agenda has 3 items on it tonight. Item A is talking about the city manager candidate review. B is community engagement regarding downtown parking. And C is a public works update. And I'm told that this is the last time we're going to be using these microphones. That a contractor's coming in tomorrow and going to replace these microphones with microphones in the ceiling, all directional, and everything's going to be wonderful.
That's funny.
But I am excited about that. Okay, let's go with agenda item A. It's ID 17-124, City Manager Candidate Review and Selection Process. Give us a moment to get started here. Okay, the Waters and Company was contracted by us to conduct city manager candidate review and selection process, and we have a representative from Waters here tonight to talk about where we're at. Please.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Miguel Ozuna. I believe we've met before video conferencing.
Can you pull the mic a little closer? These are very tough to work.
Is that better?
That's better.
I think we've met over video a couple months ago, and Chuck has actually been working with you all since then on 2 of the projects. One of them is just the city manager, and the other one being the city attorney. In this case, we obviously went back and looked at more applicants for the city manager position. We have 42 applicants that applied since we went out and re-advertised again. We do believe we have strong candidates in this round as well. But certainly, we provided that information to you this past week, over the weekend. I'm sure you've had some time to review that, and we're here to ask or to answer any questions you may have about those, and then possibly selecting some candidates for interviews. Certainly, we're here to answer any questions about these candidates or anything else about the process that you may have.
Okay. Well, do we have any questions? Okay, Doug?
I don't have a question, but this is our second round of going through city manager candidates, and we appreciate the job that you've done and the candidates that you have brought to us. After some thought process and looking at the candidates, I would like to go with our acting city manager, Mark Ralph, as our city manager. I've seen him in action for 10 months. I think he has integrity. I think he understands the role of the council and the city manager and how those interrelate to each other. He treats the council the same, council members the same as far as I can tell. Information comes to all the council members. And I'm going to propose or make a motion or an unmotion or whatever else it is that we do, that we make Mark our single finalist and move forward on negotiating a contract with him.
I'm not sure whether it's a motion or an unmotion. Should we go for some discussion?
Well, we can't take a vote. It's a study session.
That's right.
Yes.
That's what we're saying. So let's go for some discussion.
Okay.
As far as I can tell, Mark's not an applicant. He withdrew his application. So I think there should be an honoring of that. There was obviously reason, and I think we should honor that.
Well, some of us, or at least I've talked to this acting city manager, and if I understand him correctly, he would be willing to be considered. So, having myself observed his behavior as closely as I pay attention to everything, I think Doug is making a good recommendation.
Jerry.
Mark, are you throwing your hat in the ring?
Would you take the position if we offered it to you?
Well, I would consider it. I obviously have lots of questions and lots of details we'd have to walk through, but I certainly would consider it. If I may, I'll just, I appreciate the confidence. And, every one of you have been very kind to me and certainly supportive. My kind of withdrawal last week, I think in large part was basically a concern that I would have to participate in a competitive process, and if I was not selected, would have to then create a relationship with whoever the council would appoint, and I fully appreciate what the council's intent is. And that's a struggle for me personally that I did not necessarily want to go through. There are other issues. I do believe that the retreat we've got scheduled for Friday is probably going to address the balance of that. But I guess I would consider it.
Other comments? Bill?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Mark has done a great job of stabilizing this city after we, as a council, let the former city manager go. You've led the staff, you've led council in a lot of ways, you've done a good job of unification. There are evolutionary issues that happen with anybody. I have concerns that this would open a public works hole. We have a great public works director. We have a lot of public works challenges coming up. We have a lot of infrastructure issues that need to be handled. And I think the opportunity, after reviewing these resumes, to foreclose it at this point is not the best decision, because we have the opportunity, depending on how things go, to get a seasoned executive who's a city manager by pedigree. Mark's done a great job as the city manager in the interim, but I think the best analogy is it's like a football team with players out of position. Mark has filled in at another position admirably, and I think he's to be commended by that, but the long-term strength of the organization is best if we have players who are the size, weight, strength, and agility to handle their primary position, and to put Mark in the manager's position long-term would open a vacancy in public works that we would have to turn around and go fill. So that exacerbates the significant loss of department heads we've had, and puts another player out of position. So I would, I appreciate what Mark has done. I would not be opposed to Mark continuing, although I've spoken with Mark too. I'm not sure that would be in his game plan. He'd like to continue his public works, if anything, and I respect whatever Mark wants to do, but I really think there's a thing in the Army that we got in leadership school, and that's mission men's self. And the first thing that we as council members have to think about is the long-term mission of the city of Littleton, and that's to have the strongest people in the strongest positions for the longest period of time. So I would not support Doug's quasi-motion at this point in time, and I think we ought to go ahead with the list we have here and see if there's a solution within that, and go from there.
I would support Mark, and I'd like to talk a little bit about why I come to that conclusion. And it was not a foregone conclusion or a predestined conclusion in any way. When we did the first hiring effort and Mark did not apply, I had talked to him and asked him if he was going to, and he discussed it, a reason why, and that was fine, and we moved on. But as I continued to work with him, in different things. I just got to know them better. And when I read the applicants, and we have great applicants, and we've had some applicants that have some varied experience and some real worthwhile types of experience for the city. But as I read those and I look at those, I now look back, particularly with this group now looking back, I think the worst mistake an organization could make is to miss the people that are right within the organization. And I've been watching Mark do what each of these people say are their best practices. As they go through the interviews, they talk about how they would ensure an equality of information for the community and the council and the staff, and how they would keep people up to date with the information that they need on a regular basis, and how they would respect the different needs of different council members and different staff people to absorb information in different ways and recognize that, how they would get out in the work and see what the work is and help in certain ways to understand it, and how they would talk to the community from all points of view and listen to what they have to say and be comfortable in that environment. And I keep reading through this and I'm seeing, well, Mark's done that, Mark's done that, Mark's done that. And in many of these cases, it's been supported by a community member or somebody else who said, hey, I want to tell you something Mark did. So without me trying to focus on Mark as the candidate, I'm coming to the realization that he's doing the things that these great candidates say they would do. The other thing is, we've all been through leadership changes, and I don't think it's unusual for us to hear somebody say, well, you know, I look real hard at the organization for the first 3 months and kind of get a feel for who the people are, and then I'd probably take a look. Maybe after about 6 months, I might want to make a few changes and a few tweaks, but I've been told as I've heard from different applicants, you've got to be really careful making operational changes without really understanding. So, you know, I might not want to make any real significant changes for a year. Well, Mark's just had that year. And I think this city has things going on that demand some attention and some movement and some decision-making in the next few months. Fire, certainly one of them, budget being another one, that I'm totally confident in Mark and his ability to do that, totally confident. I also believe that when I go back through and I look at our brochure and we look at what we said we were looking for in the brochure, in the candidate profile and in the current challenges and opportunities, I see things that have been reflected in things that I've seen in the last several months working with Mark to show that those could be done. The other thing I'm aware of is Mark's experience in regional operations, like we are dealing with our wastewater treatment plant, and regional types of decision-making like we do with Dr. Cog, are things that he's done in his previous job in the northwest part of the country. And some of the things that we're looking at doing within the city to particularly to take every advantage that we can of our wonderful downtown. Mark was in Grand Junction when they did that. So he brings some experience that, unless you'd had the chance to talk to him about some of these, they hadn't come up to council meetings particularly, but just hey, how are you doing? Do you remember when kind of thing? Or have you ever done this? So I've also found somebody who's extremely humble, and he's going to be the last person to stand up there and toot his horn in an environment like this on TV and in front of a group of us. So I do want to just compliment that humility, and I suggest that in no way should that be looked at as hesitancy. I think it's just the nature of what we've known Mark to be. So I'm very comfortable, and it was never, as I said, I was looking at candidates, and I truly believed that we were going to lose the opportunity to have an inside candidate, which I think is, in this circumstance, the best choice. So that's how I feel, and I would like to flesh this out and see what this means, because I don't have the answers to some of the questions, because I hadn't really planned on this. So.
Well, I got the email along with everybody else where Mark said that he was withdrawing himself from consideration, which I was disappointed at. But my feeling is I'm looking for the person that's best for the position in Littleton right now. And we have a number of circumstances the city is facing, along with some time deadlines. I don't want to concentrate on those so much because then it looks like a choice of convenience, and it absolutely is not. One of the advantages of working with somebody is you can see how they actually conduct business and what they're like and what they do. When we're hiring somebody, the first thing we do is we read through the resumes and try and ascertain what they're like from the resumes. Then we bring them in for interviews, and both of those still don't tell you what they're actually going to be like when they get here. And we have a number of complex problems. We have a number of complex relationships. Our fire department relationship and our fire service is complex. There's lots of politics involved with a number of different entities. Our sewer plant is regional with 2 owners, and I think we have 8 connector districts. Englewood has a number. That's a very complex relationship. Both of those relationships have been fraught with problems. Mark has the experience of knowing who the players are and recognizing what the problems are. I think he's the right guy. And what's probably most important to me is city manager's relationship and conduct with the council influences the council's conduct with each other. And in the last 10 months or so, Mark's conduct with the council has been exemplary. His communication has been straightforward and upfront. He has been willing to admit when he's made mistakes, which is both refreshing and rare. He hasn't treated one council person different than the other council people. There's no creation of cliques. There's none of that stuff. And we need that as a council to help us be able to function effectively as a group. And part of the reason why we're in the position that we are in right now is because we've had a difficult time doing that. So from my viewpoint, Mark is the man that I want to be as city manager of Littleton. I think he is the best choice for the city. I wish the process had turned out differently, but frankly, I think he's important enough to acquire, for lack of a better word, to recruit, to get here, that I think it's important that we support him and get him here. That's my feelings.
I think it's very unfortunate that our current charter says that we have to discuss personnel issues in an open forum. I don't think it's appropriate to do so. I think it's disrespectful of the people involved to do so. And I think it's unfair to everybody in the process, because I don't think we as a council can be as honest about anything that's going on. I will say that one issue that has bothered me, and this is under the unfortunate thing about a personnel issue, is that we say things are going well. I've had 2 issues that I've brought before council and had support of at least 4 members to come forward to study sessions, and they've been killed. City's managers, according to the legislative rules, it's the city manager's job to develop the agenda. There are only 2 people in those meetings. One is the mayor, the other is the city manager. I don't believe the city manager has killed these. I believe it's been killed by the other person in the meetings. But the fact is that it lies to the city manager to bring those forward, their design guidelines and their revenue study. Both have been approved by 4 people to move forward, and they've never shown up. So how do we rectify that? I think that can be evolutionary. I think it's the kind of thing, and I agree, Mark is a very even guy. He treats everybody alike as far as I can see. And I believe if it was totally up to him, those would have come forward. But it hadn't happened. So we have to get a fix for that, and that can happen over time. I think another issue that's here is the last time we had a major personnel decision on a city manager, there were 6 people, 6 council members there. There are 6 people council members here tonight. I don't think that's fair or right timing. As far as a right-now manager, I think there's some merit to that, but one of the issues that we have to deal with as a city is looking at the long term. We cannot continue to operate looking short-term for everything. Mark is great, and I applaud Mark. I like Mark. I think he's done a tremendous job in this role. As I said, players out of position. But to go that direction because we need the right now player, the right now manager, is to short-term is the same way that it's a shortchanging the city to do so on economic policy or housing or infrastructure or anything else. We need to look long-term. We need that depth of experience that certified managers can bring to us who have been down this road before. And I think there's a lot of stability to be gained, and it doesn't hurt a city to get a fresh look from outside.
Mr. Mayor?
Peggy?
Yeah. If things have not come forward, Bill, and you're saying they haven't, it is not the city manager's fault. He has repeatedly asked us what we want moved up ahead of things or not moved ahead of things, whatever. It's this council that drives the agenda for what shows up at study sessions and in the chamber.
But how many times do you have to get 4 votes, Peggy? This
No,
is not the time to argue about that.
Well, I'm not
just
trying
saying
to
this.
argue. I'm making a statement. So we are at fault for what you're talking about, not the city manager, in my view. And I've been on council long enough to have seen those kinds of things happen under other city managers, things you're talking about. But it was because there was not the whole council, a majority of council saying, by golly, get this to us sooner than we see it now on the list. So we have some learning to do, apparently. We also have potential, and I said this before, for 4 different council people to be on this council in the fall, and some continuity at the top, in my mind, is a pretty good thing. But I've not had concerns about what the acting city manager has done. You mentioned examples from the military. But one of the things I know, not from being in the military, but from talking to enough military people and watching enough military movies, because I love them, is that in the tough situations, people rise that nobody expected to rise, and then they establish themselves as leaders, they're promoted, etc. And not that Mark was not a leader already as a chair, but I think he has excelled. And to bring someone new in who is going to have to master everything from scratch, it seems to me puts us more behind the 8 ball and trying to be what council wants the city to be.
Additional comments?
Well, I won't repeat a lot of what Councilmember Hopping said, but I do agree with substantially most of what he said in terms of the situation. And I also want to kind of emphasize how difficult this is and how, the losing the privilege of an exec session is punitive to the city. And having an opportunity to sit down with the other council members and discuss a personnel decision is a key factor in how we make and making the best decisions. It's not policy discussion, it's personnel, it's people. And having the ability to do that is definitely stifles my conversation on camera, in front of people, in an audience, copiously taking notes, reporters, etc. So I find that to be difficult, and I think that Councilmember Clark, I have real concern with bringing this up. We're 10 months into this process, and I, spent another 20 hours this weekend going through this stuff. And we have a missing council member, and we have, I think it's fair to say, at least 3 council members that are not in support of what you're asking for this evening. And so I see that that's somewhat troublesome. And I appreciate what Mark has done, and all the praise and accolades on Mark, I agree, and I think that he has done a great job. But I've said it before, I prefer to hire a professional city manager. I think that there is a lot more that goes into a city manager's job than the way he talks to council. And I think that there's 10 departments to be run, there's 400 employees, there's $100 million all-inclusive budget, funds and all. And, I think that having an experienced, seasoned city manager is very important to me. And, if we're worried about having somebody come in and take a few months to learn the ropes and take another few months to learn some other things, we've already spent 10 months dealing with this. We'll spend more dealing with it going forward. I think that smart people can pick things up and run with it. There's not one of these city managers that hasn't had to do that at least a couple of times in their careers. So I don't think that should be a reason to hire an interim. So I'm not supporting this tonight, Doug, and I would like to see us have a conversation about the applicants that we had, and then I would like to see us also have a conversation about bringing in an interim. We like to look at all of our options. That's an option we haven't considered. We are okay with the charter. I've talked to the city attorney, and there is a way that we can extend, not by extending contract, but by offering a contract with the understanding that there is a search going on, and that when that is fulfilled, then the contract will expire. It's done. So
Are you actually
the city
suggesting a workaround to the city charter?
It's not a workaround.
Well, the charter requires us to have an interim for no longer than a year.
And we would have a city attorney that would not be considered an interim. They would have a contract. We can't have an end date on a contract. But there would be, and I can read to you the city attorney's.
So you're suggesting
email.
hiring an interim city manager?
I'm suggesting we
that
look
you're
at that as an
calling-
option.
That you're calling a permanent city manager
suggesting-
just to get around the charter. Frankly, it's that kind of stunts that have gotten us in trouble for the last 2 or 3
Frankly,
years.
it's that kind of summarization of what I'm saying that's gotten us into trouble. So
Well, we need a copy,
that's
we
not
need to
my
know what the city,
comments.
we need to know what the city attorney said.
Okay.
And I don't have anything in my mail,
This is
so-
direct from Ken. I called him this morning and asked him to do
okay,
this.
but I don't have anything in my mail.
No, I didn't send it to anyone.
And that's part of the problem that we have, is when we operate where
Well, I can call
some
the city
people-
Okay,
attorney and
tell us
ask him a
what you
question.
have, but that's so problematic when we didn't get a chance to look at it. I have no idea what it says.
Simple. Confirming that the charter says that you only get an interim manager for a year. In addition, it also says that the term of the contract needs to be indefinite, so my idea about a 6-month agreement won't work. However, we can still do an indefinite agreement on term with someone, but also include language that the parties understand the city is doing a search for a more permanent manager, and the expectation is that this will not be a contract that extends for a long period of time.
So we're calling it an indefinite, but everybody's understanding that it's not really indefinite. that it's fully our intent to do this as a workaround for the year limitation.
I called Sam Mamet, who has the knowledge of the city managers that we have been calling them circuit riders. They have a different nomenclature, but for our purposes, we'll stay with that. And he indicated that they work with these types of contracts all the time, that they're not permanent contracts, but because many city charters require that there be a contract, that they work with those all the time, that he has worked with city attorneys to draft those, and that it's completely, it's done.
So there's a whole pool of interim city managers who are used to skirting around charter requirements.
Well, Doug, you can editorialize it however you like, but there is a number of city managers. It's not a whole pool. I think there's a handful of them that are retired that do this as a service to communities that find themselves in these types of situations. It's an option. You're big on wanting to look at options. So I think that, throwing it out there as an option that has some viability, in my opinion.
Jerry.
Thank you. Few things. The candidates that you brought to us, the last 10 candidates, from a pool of 42.
Correct.
I believe it was probably difficult to get down to 10, I would guess.
Yes, I mean,
I appreciate
it is.
you
There is obviously most of the people that applied do have city management job, or at least at the director level. There are some people that don't at all. But certainly to get to 10 was difficult. Yes.
Yeah, that was challenging. I can only imagine. And this go around, we had 42, and last time we had about 35. So it was interesting that we only had one of those of the 35. So there's a lot of folks out there looking for jobs, and I presume.
Correct.
And obviously very qualified candidates. I was kind of pleased with a few of the folks we have tonight, in fact, as the four that I've sent you.
Yes.
Regarding the executive session thing, we earned that by overusing executive session several years ago, and the citizens of Littleton voted that we have certain or very strict or even more strict guidelines required before we go into an executive session. I agree. It's a shame we have to talk about people's personal lives like this. And, in the public, that's the way it is. But whether there's cameras in front of me or not doesn't prevent me from saying things that I would normally say behind a door or in front of a door. You know that as well as my wife knows that, and and so the cameras. We all do. Yeah, everybody knows that, but I do say what I need to say. But as far as the candidates we have now, I think we have some great candidates before us. I'm even more excited about our incoming city manager or city attorney coming in. I can't wait for him to start. I think that puts us in a real stable ground with our city attorney. I think as far as our acting city manager, promoting him to city manager, I'm highly in favor of.
Well, a couple things have come up. I have no idea why Phil isn't here tonight, and it's unfortunate that he's not. Number two, Bill, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I don't know that it had any bearing on taking a shot at me during the discussions. You would like to talk about it privately. I'd be happy to do that, but I truly have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. We publish a calendar every week. We have the things on the back of the calendar listed to move up, and they just get put on there and they move up. I don't even know if it's one of those items or not, or what the circumstance is.
I told you what they were, so, we can.
Bill, I don't know whether you told me or not, because so much information passes. But again, I don't think it has anything to do with what we're talking about when we take it up privately. And the other is, we can't take a vote here tonight, but we can move it to next week, which is a time to vote. We can find a way, I believe, to continue to move in different directions simultaneously in anticipation of a vote next week. But as we know, we don't make motions, particularly of this nature, which is policy, in a study session. So I'm looking for maybe a thought from the council members, whether they'd be comfortable putting this on as an agenda item next week. We can still, I believe the next step is we still need to give direction to Waters and Company. And we also need to decide if the whole thing's viable over the next week. So somebody's going to have some discussions and some thought processes over the next week.
My suggestion is that we assign somebody to negotiate a contract with Mr. Ralph. We're going to have to figure out what those terms are for any city manager that we come up
Are
with.
you negotiating a contract already?
Pardon? That we can bring forward as an agenda item next Tuesday that we can vote on one way or the other.
I think that's a step too fast.
Well, we've got to make some decision.
I think one of the things we need to discuss with Waters tonight is if there are any questions in the process about what the salary range might be or other conditions. If you've received information that we need to know in order to address those items, regardless, we need to come up with a contract eventually. I mean, we need to know what you found out.
We haven't received any type of information regarding terms of a contract or salary of a contract or anything like that. I think at this point, just to kind of reiterate, we provided the 10 candidates, semifinalists for you to review. Obviously, there's been discussion of moving ahead with Mr. Ralph here. But certainly, from our standpoint, I mean, it's up to council how they want to move forward. If we are going to move forward with him, it's perfectly fine. I mean, we can also be involved with that, as we've done in the past with other clients as well. Or we can do this here where we can pare down these 10 applicants to 4, 5, or 6 people that we want to interview. And, we requested that you all review the candidates and then give us a list of preferred people that you'd like to interview based on the information provided here. We can do that as well, and I can help facilitate getting us through that. But as for information relating to contract or anything like that, I mean, we haven't had any talks or received any information about that at this time.
Well, I think one of the items that's come up in the past that we didn't resolve was the expectation of the standard in the industry of some form of severance. And we just worked with this city attorney, and we were made aware of a marketplace and a standard out there. And again, all the negotiations are going to go through Waters.
Sure.
But I think you needed to know from us, and I believe that was something Chuck had kind of left us with, that if we have an answer to that, and we had talked about a 457, we had talked about different things. I don't know whether we've given you any better information.
Yes, Chuck and I did talk about some of the issues that do come about for a traditional contract. There are severances on most contracts, but certainly I hear that there's, not here, but I did see that there is a constraint on what that could be. Now, can other avenues be put in place in the contract? Yes, I mean, I think that's possible, but certainly it has to be approved by council. Once we get to that point, in talking to candidate, whether it's Mark, whether it's one of the individuals here, we, talk about that, and they should obviously, if they are going to move forward in the process and interview, that needs to be vetted out with them as well, saying this is some of the constraints, this is where we're at. What other avenues can we utilize to maybe, make up for the severance, or maybe it should just stay the way it is. Certainly, that's something that we take direction from the council as to what you all feel would be good for that. But certainly, there's other options, and we'd have to get that through legal as well.
Well, I think we really need to talk about this issue because when Chuck talked with us, he felt it was a limiting factor.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the interest of public disclosure on the candidates we got, I'd like to just kind of talk about a couple of them briefly because apparently we're not moving that direction. But without saying names, we have a gentleman from who's ICMA, the management designation for city managers, as in requisite undergraduate and graduate degrees, went to Harvard's Kennedy Senior Executive Program, 2016 New Mexico City Manager of the Year, 19-year Air Force officer, had some excellent results out of economic development in a small Pennsylvania town. The town, he was a city manager in most recently 45,000, just similar to Littleton. Dale Carnegie graduate, public-private partnership experience, LED conversion of the entire town, ICMA leadership task force. There's another gentleman.
Is he your number one? Would he be your number
He was my number one. Another gentleman, University of Central Oklahoma, bachelor's, an MPA from another school, town of 98,000. He came to Littleton to see it. Former Marine Corps officer. He's got experience with grants and affordable housing. Has won downtown revitalization awards. Showed financial creativity is my note with a debt restructure that the city had to redo. Paid off debt 5 years early. Public-private experience. He's my number two, yeah. I'm sorry, Bruce. He helped develop Community Improvement District. My other tie for number two has a Bachelor of Arts and graduate of the U.S. Naval War College, which is a high graduate level experience for military officers. Also graduate at Harvard's Kennedy School Executive Program. Former Army Colonel, high level of military experience at the think tank level. Seemed very organized. Focuses on families and businesses for economic development. Turned into community, he's tuned into community character through long-term planning. So those are the kind, I have them ranked further down, but that's the type of depth of experience that I think these candidates have. And as I say, this is not a reflection on Mark. He's focused on public works and not on city management over a period of time. And I just, I would prefer that Littleton concentrate on the longer term. So that's the kind of qualification that I feel we would be passing up.
I guess I'm more concerned about us running the snowplows and going to war, but that's just my viewpoint.
Go for it, Doug.
When you looked at the information that you got from us, anything stand out in the number of applicants that we suggested or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there is a pattern as to, some of the individuals that,
The ones that Councilmember Hopkins just mentioned, did others see them?
yes. Yes, it's very, there's one individual there that I assumed is the same one just by the qualifications that you named, that, for instance, everybody agreed on that did submit some sort of tally.
We need to tell Waters that assuming we're going parallel routes here, because we have Mr. The rep here today, we have no idea, and I'm not going to ask Mr. Ralph, to talk about the issues that are probably issues he has to wrestle with and decide with, and he needs the time to do that. So we still need to go down a parallel path because we have you here.
Okay.
And what are you thinking in terms of we interviewed 3 the last time. We had started with, I think, maybe 6 or 5, and kind of showed up with 3.
Correct.
Is that what you would think, that we would try to go 6 deep in there? I tell you that I am challenged going 6 deep in that list comfortably, although mine was just one point of view.
So, certainly, I think that, the more people we add, it adds a lot more time. Interest in these discussions that we have with interviews also kind of get watered down as time passes by. Having 6 or 7, 8, it's quite a bit. My suggestion's always been between 4, not more than 5, that we interview. And now, from that, can we have some dropped? That's a possibility. Certainly, these individuals were contacted and asked if, they are willing to go and ensure that they move forward if they move forward in the process. The interview at this point, they assured us that they would. I would shoot for, 4 or 5 that we bring back now. I mean, obviously, if council wants to do 6 or 3, it's a decision there as well. that council needs to make. But that's where we're at. In tallying this, we can get the top three, that you guys want to see, and move forward with them. If there's some that maybe fall just a little bit short, we can include them as well. But certainly I can see three that kind of stepped up from the others.
The state of Colorado requires us to go public with finalists when we get to a certain point, and I believe it's the top three, but I'm not sure anymore.
I think we're already pretty public with this, because
So,
it's,
so, this is a real challenge for us, because what we need to have you do is using the input that we've given you, or if we feel we want to give you any fresh input, any input that you have from us to come up with 5 or 6 that we want to start looking at from that list to get to the 3 or so that we want to interview, and have you doing that while meanwhile, some thoughts have to be given to what's come up tonight, and in the same time, we need to, in anticipation of any of that, work out a contract that is a model, to fill in the blanks, but we have to address what Chuck said was the issues that he said we needed to address, I believe, and that's that separation. And we need to decide as a council, we're not going to address it, we are going to address it. We have something we're comfortable with, we don't. But I don't think that issue requirement's going to be changed. Doesn't have to be tonight, but we need to interact with you to get that information to you, to begin to model some ideas. And maybe when you have them, you could come back with some suggestions and working with our staff, because I know Eric had thought of some ideas, and he presented some of them to council, but we hadn't gotten too deep in it. Any thoughts from the rest of the council?
Yeah, I would like to move forward with discussion with Mr. Ralph, but at the same time, I don't want to give away the ones that we've worked with Waters on at this point to just dispose of them in case we didn't come to some sort of agreement. I would still like to have these other candidates lined up and hopefully still involved and to move forward with them.
I have a question.
But at this point, I would like to sort of move quickly with Mark over the next few days to the week, whatever.
And
What do you see?
What do you think is the likelihood that you're going to call any of these guys after this meeting, and there's going to be any additional interest from this? I mean, it's pretty clear. There's 4 council members that are very committed to a direction.
I did jot a note of.
Feudal?
I did jot note of that possibly, meetings are being aired, and that's a concern that we could have that come tomorrow morning. Some of the people here may say, hey, I see something going on there. Can you fill me in a little bit more? But it is what it is. It's being televised. And so that's what I'm going to tell
They
them.
can watch it on the internet anytime they want after this. So,
Correct.
it's not, so let's just assume they all see it and know it. What do you think is the likelihood that we would be able to actually maintain a dynamic interview process with these guys?
It's difficult for me to say. Some of these are currently working at current cities, and then there are some that are not. I would say that the chance is highly probable that we'll have maybe some do want to withdraw, just kind of knowing what's going on. But again, that's just my opinion. Having a city manager look at what's transpired and how we're going to go with this process, it may be a concern to them, but certainly not until I talk to them and see if they've seen or are viewing what's going on.
Peggy?
So at least I'd like to clarify, in case some of those folks are watching, and I'm sure some are, my support for Mark is not a statement of hostility or disinterest in some other folks. It's just Mark is my preference. I did have a few folks that I thought could do a very good job. So this is not saying, God, there are a bunch of toads out there, so please hear that. It's just a statement reflecting support for Mark and understanding that anybody who isn't really familiar with Littleton and the staff and the citizens is going to take a good while to get up to speed. And we've got a lot going on with a lot of projects. And so this is, my support for Mark is a relative, is a comparative thing. It's not a hostile thing to any of those people. There were two in particular, three that I was more happy with. So, you know, I hope you convey to people this was not a, geez, what in the world is this
Will do.
group of people?
I just see this as a discussion of all the alternatives available to this council, and it's our job to discuss them. And I know it's uncomfortable because we don't have executive sessions, but this is council doing what council's obligated to do, and that's to look at all the alternatives. So I'm not intimidated by it or bothered by it, and anyone who wants to be a city manager who sees this and is intimidated or bothered by it, I'm questioning whether they really have been doing the job as the city manager, because I think it's part of the job of understanding that council works in a way that they work, and this is
In
it.
mysterious ways.
This is it. So, in conclusion, I would like to make sure that you have everything you need from us tonight, and that we understand we have an open opportunity to give you input to those candidates if you know, because you have to come up with that list based on our input. I get one piece of input to you. I've given it to you. Each of us gets one piece. We need to give it to you. We can modify it personally if we need to, but it's yours. And then from that, we need to come up with probably 5 or 6 folks. You don't, you know, because we're working on odds. And in the meantime, you're going to be the ones going to work on a contract for us, because that's what part of what it is. We have to have a model contract to begin to work, you know, to work off of. You know, maybe it has a couple alternatives. Our human services folks need to talk about what Littleton officers' benefits that might be manipulated in such a way as to a candidate make up for the inability that we have to do a severance package that they might otherwise have seen in other cities. We want to pay competitively, and we want to pay to the marketplace. And we have to do that, and we will do that, and we tend to do that. But we just have a couple things we need to work in that are unique to our community. What else? Somebody else help me summarize if we think we have enough information.
So Waters and Company is going to contact 3 or 4 candidates?
Well, in what I want to say is that obviously when we sent out this information to you all, each had 4 individuals did respond back and saying, hey, these are the people that I feel would be good. And what I was trying to do is get input as to
From the video?
from the video or information from here as well. Because I believe, so I did have some feedback. Now, the people that did respond to the email, they did provide names. Certainly, if there's 3 other individuals that I don't have anything from, that if I could get names, that would give me sufficient information for me to be able to say, these were the 5 that were more favorable based on the recommendations I got from the council.
So how many
That
are
gives
we
me
looking?
that would give me the information, enough information to get back with you and say, these are your finalists, and these are the people that we will be interviewing, if that's the route that we want to take.
Well, we want to make sure we interview at least 3.
Okay?
Am I correct
Okay,
on that? At least
so-
3. I mean, I can't imagine.
Need be.
And we're going to aim for like 6. You know, isn't that what we've done before? We felt we had enough time to do that if we can get a sense of that. Council, what's your desire?
I'd say come back to us with 4. At the same time, I think that Waters ought to be working with Mr. Ralph to try and work out a contract to see if we can come to an agreement. And then both of those come back to council at some point in time, hopefully Tuesday, but we'll see what happens.
But we have to make decisions in a council meeting next week.
Yes.
So we have to do.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to clarify because there's been a lot of stuff that's been thrown around tonight. So you guys are wanting Miguel to narrow it down to at least six individuals, but at the same time work on a draft at least with Mark? Is that correct?
Well, I think you have to come up with a contract on behalf of us as part of what we have you doing, the same as we did with the city attorney. We basically took a lot of information from Mr. Rohr, working with some knowledge of it. And I think the same thing, you come up with what is the marketplace out there for a city manager, or for a city of this size, for, that, and come up with some ranges and give that to us so that we know, and we give you some guidance to what is ultimately going to be a negotiations tool, because you do the negotiations for that.
So I'm hearing two different scenarios here. One is coming up with just a contract, but I'm also hearing come up with a contract with Mr. Ralph. And I'm assuming that we want to come up with a contract, not necessarily, or am I going to be negotiating with him? I think that there's two different things here. If I'm negotiating and I'm also talking to 4 other individuals, that's going to be difficult. That's going to be difficult. But I feel that what we can do is start working on numbers, start working on what type of severance packages are up there, and then bring that to you. And working with HR, we can do that. But certainly, if I start negotiating a contract with someone, I think it's going to be difficult to run parallel, but parallel processes. And I understand that obviously this is city management, and city managers should understand what's occurring, but certainly I think that there is some difficulty there from that perspective.
It does seem as though we're not doing things in proper order. Okay, so I would suggest if next week, if there's 4 people in here that want to put on the agenda next week to nominate or to support Mark as city manager and begin negotiations for a contract, that's what goes on the agenda. If it doesn't pass, then a motion should be made to, probably not even a motion, but then that would trigger bringing in these other guys for interviews. But I don't know why we would go start working on a contract. The contract, even what we did with the city attorney, Bruce, we had to customize that a bit too, because they were, and you're right, it's the negotiations, it's the back and forth. We have template, we have boilerplate, but the details are going to be more specific. Mark doesn't live in Littleton. So there's things that are going to have to be considered in that. So I think we deal with one thing, see where that vote goes. If that goes that way, then there's a trajectory. If it goes a different way, there's another trajectory. But right now, to try to do 3 different trajectories in the same way, I think we're tripping all over everything. So that's my suggestion.
I concur.
Does that sound like the answer, Bill?
I think it's disingenuous to interview the other people if there are 4 votes for it. So
See what happens Tuesday.
figure out where that's going.
So stand by for Tuesday.
Sure.
Okay. Other questions for Waters? Any other discussion of this issue?
So I just wanted to get it on record. So we are putting the process on hold currently with the other applicants. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's what we said.
Thank you.
And we are putting an item on the agenda for
That's it.
Tuesday for moving forward on Mark or not.
And then at that point, if it does go through, we start working with a contract at that point.
Yes.
Tim. And if not, then we move with the other process.
Yes, that's what makes sense.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll get to agenda item B. Okay, this brings us to Agenda Item B, which is ID 17-70, Community Engagement and Downtown Parking. Jocelyn Mills and the neighborhood team are going to present this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening. Before we get started, I'll have everyone introduce ourselves, and the thing I want to also mention is that very excited to be presenting this evening on a new approach that city staff would like to recommend to you all on community engagement and starting a pilot with downtown and parking being our first discussion, if you will. But I also want to let you know that it really has been a cross-department collaborative effort to bring this forward to you this evening. So I'll have these gentlemen introduce themselves. But in addition to the team here, we've had marketing and communications part of our team, as well as economic development, as well as Mark Ralph and other members of Public Works, and as well as other members of community development. So we're really excited about the collaborative approach internally that we've started this dialogue to bring this forward this evening. So with that, I'll have everyone introduce ourselves and then we'll get started.
Good evening, Council. Mark Behrens, Neighborhood Resources Manager.
Hi, I'm Ryan Thompson. I'm the Mediation Program Coordinator for the Conflict Resolution Center here in Littleton.
And I'm Aaron Human, the Transportation Engineering Manager.
So first, for some background for you, as you all know, last fall around that time frame, you identified that you wanted a new approach to engage our citizens and our residents and our business owners. And when we say it's everyone, residents, citizens, business owners, property owners, the whole group of people that call themselves part of the city of Littleton. And what staff did with that direction is we first wanted to look at, to give some context, what did we feel may have been some of the challenges that brought you to the direction of letting us know you want a new approach to engaging citizens. And so we looked at some of the past things, and not all of them maybe had the same struggles, but some of the challenges we felt that we would like to move past is that things weren't necessarily transparent or inclusive. Sometimes it appeared that outcomes were already established by staff before we started community engagement. Sometimes the approaches didn't have the attainable action steps to keep moving forward. It was just a process done at a point in time with no real ability to keep it evolving as the community dynamics and whatnot change. And we also found it appeared that community consensus was a struggle at times. So tonight what we'd like to do is to propose to you a new approach. So with that, and I'm going to have everyone just kind of jump in as we move along here. And we would like to frame it Littleton Listens, and the goal is inclusive community dialogue, and it's modeled after two approaches that are very well vetted, have a lot of success in creating really well established and really well-rounded community engagement. The Hans Bleicher, the systematic development of informed consent, as well as appreciative inquiry. And we feel using these two approaches and blending them to work specifically for Littleton, that we will get to transparent and inclusive process, that we will empower a community to be involved from the start at these conversations. They will result in attainable outcomes, community consensus, as well as the ability to have ongoing dialogues and engagement. We tried to create this graph here, and again, we've all seen some version of this, but the intention is to really keep the cycle going. So the blue one up the top, generally, when we worked through this quite a bit, the first step would be to invite the community to participate in dialogue and facilitate that dialogue. And then the public input and knowledge gained from those dialogues is captured and organized by themes and by staff. That public knowledge is shared with the community. And then we would set goals, evaluate outcomes, create a plan of action, and then just keep the cycle going over time. And as we continue to gain more feedback and come up with outcomes and action steps, that would just be how we would aim to manage it moving forward.
And I think there's going to be obviously other topics and areas of concern that are going to come from these meetings. So that's where we'll keep rolling the meetings, whether it's quarterly, biannually. But yeah, we'll get the other concerns that come out of the initial meeting and then keep going with that.
So these are meetings?
Yeah, so what the idea is with this program, and again, I'm communications, I'm conflict management, I'm community engagement. My idea is to basically have community conversations where we get city staff and community members to get together and have conversations. The idea is that the first meeting, or what we would call a dialogue, or the first Littleton Listens, would be held somewhere like the museum or the library, where we would have an open forum to allow people to sit down and have conversations. The appreciative inquiry model is a model that I'm very familiar with. And it's really the different approach, the difference of what we're trying to do here is go at it from an appreciative approach versus a deficit model. And how we're identifying really where does the city want to go. We've heard a lot of feedback that there's a lack of vision, that there's a lack of direction and those kind of things. And really, we have also heard that when the cities, some of the people that we've spoken with, that when they speak, they don't feel like they're being heard and they're not getting the feedback. So how do we get that engagement? How do we get people to look across the table at a city council member or a police officer or a code enforcement officer and say, this is how my life in Littleton is. This is what I want to see Littleton look like. And what we do is we start with that very open conversation and dialogue. The idea with it is that through this process, we start this cycle. And organically, through these conversations and these open question, appreciative inquiry approaches, we're going to be able to find different things to have dialogues on. So our first approach right now is parking. And how is that affecting downtown? And what is the vision for parking? And all of those kind of great questions we're going to go into this first dialogue with. The idea with this dialogue and these questions is that maybe it's not parking, but at least we're going to have the community's investment in telling us what they really feel it is. So we kind of title it parking, but really it's to get everybody in to have a conversation. Maybe it's not parking. Maybe it's something else altogether. We don't know. But at least with this process, then, if we do come up with some outcomes or some ideas that do relate to parking, then we can create a core group of people who are invested, that have participated from the beginning, to then drill down what those ideas and those visions are, and then be able to provide that input back to council. And it's what's different about it, what's unique about it, is it's not a study. We're not hiring an outside group to come in and pay them a lot of money to ask questions that we probably all know the answers to already, and the statistics really support what we've heard before. What we want to do is have a conversation. And really, you know, in a perfect world, I'd see a couple of council members sitting down with a couple of the people in the dialogue and say, what was your favorite experience about downtown, and how did that affect you, and who was involved, and how can we do more of those things? That's where I'm hoping that this idea goes. And organically, the idea, and as we go through this, I don't want to go too far, Jocelyn, but I think the next step, and when we look at the other part of this, which is the electronic and the Hans Bleikers deal, is that not only can we reach them in a face-to-face conversation or in a community dialogue where we put all this together, but we're looking at using like Nextdoor and Open Littleton and some of the more technology-based structures that we have. So my first question with Open Littleton was, well, what if I asked you what was your favorite thing about downtown Littleton, you'd give me a paragraph answer. Well, how do you measure that? Well, Open Littleton has a way to measure that. So we can be effective in the face-to-face communications. We can be effective in that physical communication that people are lacking these days. But we can also be effective by putting these questions and this program into effect on an electric level too, or on an internet level.
And I think one of the biggest things we're trying to avoid is staff telling the citizens what the issues are. We're asking them, and then we're going with it from there. And I think in the past, staff has identified what we think the issues are and brought it to the community, whereas this approach, you're letting the citizens weigh in, and they're telling us what the issues are.
Yeah, I think the idea there is to really get the input up front and then to move it forward, because that does feel like some of the feedback, at least from our perspective, that staff has gotten with some of the more current public processes that we've been undertaking. So it's not intended necessarily to add more meetings, to have meetings. It really is to try to do things differently and engage community members for them to give us input up front, and then that turns into how we bring those themes and those items back to council, that to then figure out what the priorities are and to move that forward in that capacity.
Question, Nextdoor gets to a certain population that signs up for it. Is there any effort in this or plan to try to track some of the customers of downtown, because they may not be on Nextdoor,
Yes.
to get input from people who are actually customers here?
Yes, so if we can just kind of, so generally, yes, we're still evolving some of the details on when and what exactly we would do, but yes, it's about dialogue. How do we include stakeholders in downtown in that particular discussion? We've had a lot of comments, I know at council, we've had comments at staff with people concerned about a variety of things downtown, so that it seemed natural to take that as the first topic, and then recognizing that, right, we have businesses, we have some groups that are downtown, and so we would also formulate how we include them, whether we go to some of those meetings or bring people in or whatnot, to really ensure we're soliciting feedback from all of the interests
And
levels,
it
if
would
you
be
will.
patrons also, Bill, outside of, they don't necessarily need to reside in the city, but if they're patronizing downtown restaurants and businesses, certainly we would want them included also.
They're using light rail. That's a good
Yeah.
example.
And you're getting people that drive cars, right?
Sorry?
You're getting people that drive cars, right? Since it is parking?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, correct, yes. There we go.
Just making sure.
Get Uber.
Check for driver's license.
Yeah, that'll be part of it.
So I have
Yeah.
a question. You all have copies of what's up there. Do we have copies someplace of that?
You did not. There was a brief memo in the packet this evening that
Right.
we're working
But
from.
not, okay, but it'd be nice, I think, to have a copy of that.
We can provide that.
we certainly
Initially,
can,
I was
yes.
thinking this was that, and then I thought, no, that's the other one, so.
Yes.
Oh.
Because that's good.
Okay, oh,
Thank
yes. Certainly, we will give you whatever
Thank
would be
you.
helpful, yes. And then just going back to more what and why we wanted to do this, and we've talked about some of this, but really the goal is to take the community engagement to the next level, and not to overstate it, but really it is about getting input from the beginning, and then cooperatively looking at what are, and identifying themes and issues from community members, giving us that feedback, rather than staff assuming we know what the issue is and working it that way. And then we also believe this provides an opportunity to establish ongoing input versus just a one-time approach. And obviously involving citizens as well as businesses, residents, visitors, drivers of downtown to gain that feedback and direction. And the end goal would be to create strategic directions, obviously with council, on identified topics and projects with investment from the community. So not to reiterate, the Littleton Listens is the platform that we'd like to use. And we do believe that through this, we would be, depending on what it was, developing communication channels to the community and council and vice versa, and really creating that model and that structure moving forward. Downtown parking, and as we've said, we've all heard in the past several months, people coming and providing input to council as well as to staff on issues that they feel relative to downtown, and knowing how important our downtown is to our community identity. Obviously, it's a big visitor attraction, and it's a big, like heart of the community, if you will, for everyone who lives here. And then with the changes and growth pressures that we've seen, we've just had a lot of comments. So it seemed that we would select this first topic because people have already been giving us that input that it's important, and we want to move that forward first. And then this gets back to the structure of how we would take it on, to Ryan's point earlier of, and we're working on the details of this, but bringing you tonight the concept of how we would like to move the process forward. And we can, if you agree to it, then we can work through more of the details of exactly how we would set it up for the first topic, and as far as marketing it and outreaching it to people, as well as what we would do online versus in-person meetings, and still working through some of those details. But this is generally the model we would like to take on.
And we want to try and mirror the two as closely as possible, so that we're getting the same, or we're getting this similar data as online as we are in person. So that's what we're looking at with Open Littleton and the capabilities that has that we were kind of unaware of.
So I could conceive of somebody identifying an issue they'd like worked on, only that issue is going to cost $3 million. So it's not going to, from my perspective, probably get addressed very quickly. I mean, it just is a reality. So how in this process will you be showing that kind of thing so that people know you here? Like, because once we talked about having a bridge go over Santa Fe so people can come back and forth from the river, but the cost of that is exciting. So letting people know, look, we really hear this. This is one of these things maybe we put in a grant for, maybe whatever, but it's far out on the horizon unless we get a grant.
Generally,
So,
yeah, go ahead. I don't want
to
to.
speak to it, I think really what the neat thing about the dialogue is that it creates energy in community and it engages them. It doesn't promise them anything. So the idea of really what we're talking about is more of a philosophy and a vision and those types of things, and coming up with some of the things, some of those discussion topics that we would then present back to a forum like this and allow those conversations to continue. So it wouldn't be in any way a guarantee that something's going to happen or a call to action in any way. What it is it's a way to get people to actually touch another person and then to see that information funneled back to these people here that make those decisions. And so that's the beauty of it, is that really we're not saying, okay, this is what you want, this is what we're going to get you.
No, but what I hear sometimes from people downtown, whether they're citizens or visitors, is I keep telling folks this is what you ought to fix, and they come back. I'm not going to come back anymore because nobody's done diddly about it. They
Right.
don't always.
Right. And the beauty with that is that what we're going to do is we're going to start, hopefully we get hundreds of people to show, and we get a huge investment. And then what we do is we take those people who are still engaged, still feel that they have a big role to play, and we drill them down into more of a core group, okay? So those people that still have that belief that the bridge is the answer, and that's the only answer, we still ask for their participation, but what we can do with this program is show them that the other people might not have the same vision, and people are going to be unhappy, and people, that I deal with that all the time. Some people are going to be unhappy, and some people won't let things go. But as a community and as a city, we can say, listen, we've sat down with you. We've had conversations. We've reported back your information to the people that can make those decisions. If ultimately they still don't agree with what you believe, if they don't agree with the bridge, at least we can tell you that we've heard you and we've been able to say this is where we do it.
Or there are higher priorities right now.
Right, exactly. And with the core group, what we can do is, again, this is it's an organic and it's an ongoing process. So that core group, we don't have to meet on a quarterly basis. Maybe it's a semi-annual deal. Maybe those people who are still invested a year from now. Maybe the bridge doesn't work this year, but that core group of people we talk to in 18 months when they do a budget review, and that might be on the plate. But at least they know that somebody's heard them and that their name's on an email list, and that then the nice thing too is if we get them to participate in this, then we go with the Open Littleton. We make them sign in, and then we have them getting emails through Open Littleton, and so they're getting information from us that they're not even aware that they're looking for. And so then it's more of an over communication where we're in a different position. We're providing them with stuff they didn't know they needed.
I think the other thing too that's really exciting about this opportunity is how we want to have dialogue with people, so that I think what we will find is the other benefit will be that people just have the opportunity to talk to each other. And I think sometimes just in general, we can say, well, I don't like this and I don't like that. And if the goal behind this appreciative inquiry and the Hans Bleicher thing is to open it up and talk about what are our opportunities. And if you frame it in that way, I think people will find, you know what, we may not be that polar in values, and we actually may find more commonalities. And even if you don't necessarily agree, you participate so that you can have an awareness about, you know, this majority of people wanted this to be as a top priority. That may not be mine, and mine may be lower, but I understand and I have more awareness about those priorities and those themes that are coming out of the process. That's the other portion of this that's hard to explain without actually just having a
If I
video
may.
of it. But yes.
I'm sorry, Jocelyn, don't mean
No,
to
no,
interrupt,
no,
but
don't be
if I
sorry.
may, this- You know, I think I would like to draw another parallel where these concepts that are being suggested here for downtown, we actually used when we did the West Mineral transportation study, if you kind of remember some of that discussion. Now, this is a little more complex, I got to be honest, and a little bit of a different approach there, but in the West Mineral there, we actually went to those citizens. It was about, you know, some access issues and frustration with traffic there along that section of Mineral. And it was a deliberate attempt to go in there and just tell them, you got to tell us what the problems are that you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit, in the very beginning, that first meeting, it was tense. There was a lot of people who felt frustrated. They felt like the city was not listening. And then we worked through a very similar process to this, where we took that input, they were engaged, we looked through alternatives, we actually prioritized that as a community in that group, and we've certainly laid out expectations about what's possible and what's not. So a lot of that is, you know, very similar to what's being suggested here. Now, again, smaller scale, different, this is much more complex. The other thing I would add is that, in my view, downtown is one of those things where, as somebody else said, it truly is kind of the heart of the city. In many ways, it kind of defines us. And there definitely is a lot of things going on downtown that I believe that we're going to have to address. Mm-hmm. And I'm aware of the history of a lot of studies that we've done. My perception is that we've measured a lot of things and then things have stopped for whatever reason. To me, something different has to happen here. Mm-hmm. So that as we gather information, and one of the things I certainly learned in the downtown of Grand Junction is that you had to collect data. You had to collect information about where parking is occurring on a regular basis. So if that truly is the issue, it doesn't matter if it's perceived or real, that you must go through some process to collect information over time, because that will inform you. It will inform all of us, the patrons, the business owners, about, you know, what we truly see and the options long term. So this is an attempt to try to, you know, I think, do a little deeper look at these kinds of issues and actually create something that's, you know, long lasting. It's not just a study.
Mm-hmm. Under the category of impatience, which are not the things you plant in your yard, but is there any reason that on some of the parking issues we can't go ahead and address fairly obvious solutions now? Like diagonal parking on a road like Powers that's so wide, or, you know, the 2-hour zone near Randy Stein's house that magically appeared when he went on city council, and, you know, some of those things. I mean, is there, can we do interim steps? And I realize this is a longer term plan, but, and I'm not a traffic guy, but I walked around, you know, just kind of eyeball. Looks like we could pick up 15, 20 spaces down there just by lining things and striping and diagonal things. And all.
Well, let me try and address that. I mean, there's two parts to this. To add to what Mark was saying about the study we did for Mineral Corridor, the reason it was so successful is because we did take the time to listen. When we started out, there were many suggestions, ideas that were conveyed to us that we took the time to explain to them why they wouldn't work. There were others that were conveyed to us that we incorporated and were really good ideas. And by going through that process and taking the time to listen to people and explain to them why we're moving forward with these ideas and not others, and why these are good solutions and these might not be, it really, everyone bought into it a lot more than they would otherwise. Even people who were opposed to it from the beginning, in the end said, you know what, I didn't necessarily agree with all your solutions, but I respect the way you went about and came up with them, and I'm willing to now watch to see what happens and if they make a difference. The other side that came out of that study was it was a phased solution. So it looked both immediate and long-term. We would do the same thing in this case. But again, by skipping the step of first listening to people, and I know it seems as simple as, okay, we could just go stripe some angled parking spaces, but are we really going to gain that much from adding a couple spaces, or are we going to lose a lot more for being accused again of coming up with solutions before really hearing the problems? So I'd rather first have that initial discussion and hear from people, what are all your issues and concerns? And then we can very quickly from that jump into, okay, what are some interim solutions we can start identifying? And also let's look at long-term solutions, both at the same time. And we can get some buy-in really quickly, and then everybody will feel like they've been heard and agree with the solutions we're coming up with, as opposed to starting to do things, and then yes, it's going to please some people, but it's also going to make other people upset. Why are you putting spaces here and not over here? Why are you focusing here to start off with? If we haven't gone through the time and the trouble to say, well, here's what we heard from everybody. Everybody's really concerned about this, so it makes sense that we focus here first, or we start implementing some things here first. It just gives you that background or that basis to go from. So I know.
So I hear what you're saying. So you're saying they may say, I mean, diagonal may be great in some ways, but maybe the public input is, you know what, let's make it a one-way street the other way.
Right.
Just pulling it out of the air.
Or they might say, we hate diagonal parking.
All right.
We don't like that. So don't dare put that in our city. You know, we've seen that in other downtowns. It doesn't work. It causes problems. I don't know, but I don't want to assume what those solutions are.
I get it. Thank you.
Okay.
I think, that being said too, though, I know there's a need for valet parking, and that's a present address.
No, you don't know that until you hear the public input.
Right. But the thought is, like, again, I know that they're working on a ordinance, or they're updating the valet ordinance and those kind of things. I think that would continue to be updated. That process would continue. It wouldn't stop until we finish this. This is more along the lines of an ongoing, progressive thing. So we wouldn't put the brakes on what's already in the works.
Okay.
To do it. I think we're just opening that door and listening.
Okay.
And I think, just to add a little bit to that, you know, there's lots of things that are ongoing, even in downtown, that we're looking at right now of doing. So we're not putting everything on hold, but when it comes specifically to parking, if that's what this first dialogue is going to be about, we don't want to start anything with that. So while we are looking at valet parking because we have a restaurant opening up that we've identified it'll be a real issue if we don't have something in place for them, we're looking at things like improving crossings at a lot of different locations, putting in more flashing crossings to make it safer for pedestrian stuff. And that might encourage more people to walk more downtown, park a little further out than where they want to right now, things like that.
And part of the reason for my impatience is that I think people downtown have expressed anxiety to me with the View House opening. You know, it's log jam at times a day now for parking. What do we do now? And I feel like they would like to see at least some progress in that direction. And your point's well taken about getting the input. When would all this happen? What kind of timetable are we looking at?
So yeah, that's what we've been working through, and so we don't have a specific date for you yet, but we're aiming for end of May, beginning of June as our time frame to make sure we can get adequate marketing announcements and whatnot out to the community. And I think the other thing about this approach, and I everyone's been spot on about, yes, we have some things that we're still working on right now to move that forward. But I think the other thing about taking this approach is it does give us the ability and the opportunity to get input so we can really think about, yes, parking is the issue, but we want to hear all that input because the last thing we want is some plan that ends up with unintended consequences because we hadn't thought everything through, right? So parking seems like, oh, you just need a driver's license and you need a car to drive, but, everything, it's the domino effect because then, what does that mean relative to land use and those codes and how do all of those things impact the timing of the signals, like all of that stuff is part of the picture. So by having this conversation, dialogue, all those opportunities get out there because there may be things we hadn't even thought of that become solutions. And that is part of how the whole West Mineral thing evolved too, is that we learned a lot and we were able to come up with solutions based on that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the ideas we kind of put forward were decent ideas, but there were things that they were suggesting, we say, oh, no, we can't do that. And someone would propose something else, and we go, well, that's a great compromise. And we ended up implementing a lot of the suggestions that people came up with, that residents came up with, because they were kind of morphing ideas we had with things they had, and it ended up working really good. And a lot of them were cost savings ideas as examples. Stripe something rather than build new medians, that type of thing. And it's proven to be really effective. So, we have a very engaged and dynamic community that, we have a lot of smart people here who are going to come up with some ideas that we might not have thought of. People who've traveled to other places that we haven't traveled to and gone, I saw this there. Is that something you can do? And we might go, well, we can't do that exactly, but that makes us think about some other things we've seen. We could do that. So,
Rock and roll.
Jerry?
It seems to me, and Aaron, I think you're helping me to understand this better too, is that we've done so many study sessions in the past, our study sessions, we have done those too, but studies, which have cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars per studies that we have asked for, then we read it and we file it away. It seems this approach is more real-time, like you were saying, whether we went to Mineral, wherever it was, is that we go in and you get real feedback that we have control over, we, the city, have control over. There's so many times these studies that we pay big bucks for kind of just ends when they hand us the hard document. So it seems to me this is something that's going to be far more real time. Is it something we can apply somehow to Littleton Boulevard?
Yeah.
We can ask
anything.
The best thing about it is really it's a structured set of questions, and so we can pick the topic, any topic. We can cater it to whatever we want to focus it to, and that's the neat thing about it. If we have one, if we come up with Littleton Boulevard or whatever the topic is, we don't get any investment. We know that that's not the topic for the next one, and we can do these. We can break them up and do them quite often. We can do them quarterly. We can do them however we need to. But yeah, whatever the topic, we can cater it to that. That's the nice thing about it.
I think to your point, Jerry, when you don't start with the community and the citizens and you bring in, at some point we may need to bring in someone to do a study, but when that's the first step, again, you're telling people, we don't, no matter what you say, here's the expert and this is what they're saying. So this is gathering that feedback from the start, and then, study may be part of some of these issues, but yeah.
Additional comments?
This looks really good. Congratulations. There's actually two parts to parking, and you started to talk a little bit about the other part, and they're actually somewhat related. And one is how much parking do we have or not have in downtown, and what's the demand for it, and where is the demand? And it sounds like that's kind of what you're oriented to. But the other downtown problem related to parking is the parking regulations that are called out in the parking part that have hindered people's ability to develop or forced them to go into historic preservation or the district or things like this. So we probably need to know this first, I'm guessing, before we have enough information to figure out what we want to change and how much, if any, of the other regulations. But we really need to address both because it's caused some unusual situations of people having to lease property someplace else, or the city in some cases kind of going like this in order for something to get redeveloped. And we really need to tackle that at some point in time.
And I think that's what we're saying, and that's well said in that manner of this gives us that opportunity so that we get to explore everything and there won't be unintended consequences about what those solutions might be. It really does drill down into what are all the components that we need to look at to get to whatever the end goal is, right?
Yeah, and we need to know whether we have a deficit or a surplus of parking spaces and where they're at, and then I assume that we would apply that to potential changes to redevelopment code at locations. So this looks actually very good.
Would this be tied into economic impact of some of these changes as well? So if you change some of the parking regs that Doug is referring to, that, thank you, Jerry. If some of those impact economic development. And for
Absolutely.
example, the parking on Historic is what encouraged a lot of people to come into the district, which encouraged a lot of reinvestment, which attracted a lot of the quality of merchants we have. So that's a balancing act.
It is. It absolutely is. And then
yeah.
you have a parking problem, and then how do you pay for it, and what do you do, and what is the parking problem?
Yeah.
And like Jocelyn said, that economic development helped us develop this also, so.
Created our problem.
So, they are in the loop on all this.
Yeah, okay. Or our challenge, it's not a problem.
On the turf.
The idea with economic development, and Denise and them, is that this process then would be applied in any new developments that come along. How do we reach out to the community? You're going to build a new property, and how is that going to look, and how do we engage the people that live around it? And if we can get this process to work in this type of setting, it's going to work the same for those types of settings as well.
And Ryan, I think you're right on, because one of the challenges, I think, and all council members share it, is how do you get a good cross-section of public opinion that really impacts the area that you're trying to make policy that it affects? How do you get the best public input that represents a broad cross-section of the people who are actually are impacted by that change? So I think this is a great step in the right direction. Thanks.
Yeah, good point. Agree.
Any additional questions or comments? Because you've gotten to the end here where you want to get to, is council happy? With city council approval to proceed with the pilot program, and I think you're absolutely getting that support. I don't think there's any doubt at all. Yeah, well, there you go. There you go.
Oh, wait, we can't do that.
Let me ask one question, and you touched on it a little bit. The action piece, and I'm not saying like the answer, I'm just saying the action piece, because some of that can be done at a very low level of authority. Some of it requires some coordination. Some of it might require an ordinance. If it was the parking, unfortunately, it's going to have to be an ordinance. A traffic engineer has a tremendous amount of influence within the context of their professional job. Where are you thinking that all fits in something like this that is also dynamic? I mean, you might try something that might not work, kind of thing.
And how do we close the loop?
Yeah, how do you close the loop and know that the loop, because of the change, the rapidity of change down there, may not be the answer anymore because time has passed on and the solution is perhaps different. How do you keep this thing going so that it works?
What we've come up with are a couple of ideas. One is that the information that's gained from these meetings or these topics that we flush out, basically what we come up with from these meetings, we'll be able to put on a website, or you'll be able to find that information from Littleton Gov. So we'll have a website that's dedicated basically to what's been flushed out from this dialogue and what's going on. And so that would be my department or my group's job to keep that up and to keep that going. The other piece of that to close the loop would then be, after each of these events, it would be on myself or someone to come in and feed that information back to you. So we would provide it to you in email before and give you all of the information, and then come in and kind of give you a presentation to explain, hey, here's what we found out. And then from there, again, we can go back to, ideally, what I'd like to do, if we're talking about parking, one of my interviewees as we do this inquiry would be the parking enforcement guy. And he would hopefully be sitting across the table from a business owner that has a business that's open on Friday night. And so that loop is going to get closed immediately. This guy is going to see that there's a need on Fridays. And so we're going to be able to see an immediate loop. We're going to be able to see those things fixed. We're going to be able to then, those who participate can then take that information back to their departments, and then we will then be able to disseminate that information as well.
But let's say, just as an example, let's say permit parking, something that exists, and let's say that after a lot of information, a process that you enter is to change something to do with permit parking. Well, you could have known about a month whether it's working or not, and you may have to change it again. I mean, how do you get that, and then the authority to do that, of course, you could work that through the city manager's office, I think. So, I mean, it's easily done, but,
I think
the criticism that I'm addressing is They thought they fixed it, they didn't. And then they came back and it was worse.
Yes,
I think,
absolutely.
yeah, I think so. To Ryan's point and to your point too earlier, of it's different layers and different levels of actionable outcomes or next steps. And so going back to I think what Mark was saying earlier about like data and the collection that we will get from this process, it may be one of the outcomes is we really need to start monitoring all of that in an ongoing data collection cycle so that we can be ahead of it and understand what's going on versus just, oh, it's a problem now, oh, fixed, done, check, on to the next. It's about keeping that going. Not everything, but some of those outcomes may be that.
Well, and Ryan and I even talked about, with self-driving cars, in 10 years from now, we might not have a parking problem. Who knows?
The neat thing about what I do as a mediator and what we can do with this process is at the end of all of my contracts that I have people who mediate participate, it says parties have agreed to come back and continue this discussion if something's not working out. And that's the nice thing about this is that when we get to that core group and we do come up with a solution, then we're going to be able to set out 6 months and say, hey, we're going to follow up and we're going to relook at this if it's a 30-day and 90-day, and we can set all of that stuff up as we go through the process. How are we going to make sure that what we're working on here has teeth, and how does that reflect?
I think one more thing just to add to that too is, we aren't protesting to have all the answers right now. This is something we're developing as we go. And the way I think we see this is we're going to learn from the first project and the second project, what things to apply to the third project and the fourth project. And the way we're going to try and keep this all open, I don't want to use the close the loop type of thing, but we want to leave some of these issues open so that people can continue to comment on them if there's ongoing issues in the future. We're never going to satisfy everybody. We're trying to satisfy the majority of people, hear them, and do what we think is right that serves the majority of the people. But there are going to be other ideas that come out in 6 months maybe, or a year after we implement some of these things as things continue to change. So we're not going to just take them off the website because, like Jocelyn said, check, we've done that project. We'll keep them out there and say, okay, we've been opening new restaurants or new apartment complexes and stuff. Now how does that influence what we instituted a year ago or 6 months ago? It's constantly changing. So I think your point is really well taken that we might try some things out and they don't work. And we might not find out they don't work for a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years. Things are always changing. So we don't want to close off any of these issues just because we think we've solved them in the short term.
Thank you. You've really answered my question. That's it.
And you'll share this with Planning Commission and Historic Preservation, of course. Yeah.
Peggy.
So I have a couple questions and observations. Have you asked people how far they roam when they're downtown? A lot of people, it's a single destination, right? I won't say what they go and do, but probably most of you know what a lot of people go and do. They go and eat and so forth. So I would think we would be wanting to have a solution that would get people to go to some stores while they're also going, before they go to dinner or after they have lunch or whatever. But some people don't want to walk very far. Some have 3 or 4 kids within 5 years of age of each other. All in this tight little whatever, and the parents will walk, but the kids aren't real happy about it. So and I've said this to council before, one of my thoughts is, why don't we have a circulator bus that would essentially make it much easier for people to have multiple stops along downtown and around Alamo? And so asking people, would they be willing to ride one? Would they be interested in riding one? And then, of course, the next question is, would they be willing to pay a quarter or whatever, but something? Some people have told me they won't pay diddly, but they like the idea of having one. But finding out that kind of thing, it seems to me, would be really helpful, because I've made the comparison before to some of the very nice resort areas that have something like this.
There's to speak to that, Peggy, and then I'll let you ask your other question. I think there is a lot of power in asking questions, and the questions that you're asking are really what appreciative inquiry is about. The energy is gained from, tell me about your experience. How did that make you feel? What do you want to see more of? And so that's to the heart of what you're getting at there, and that's really what we're shooting for with this program, is to get to those questions and giving people, the opportunity to say, this is what happened to me the last time I was down there. This is what I need. This is what I like. This is what's working for me. So that's exactly what we're shooting for.
Yeah, and I rolled my question into what I said. So,
okay.
But anyway, so I've just, some people love walking, and some people just think it's an insult to think that they should be asked to walk, or even for their health to walk a block or something.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Any additional questions? It's a great project.
And this is for Ken. Ken, our server or whatever would be going through our server, I take it. And we have the capability today. So at budget season, you're not going to come back and say, because we added this. All right, can somebody get that in writing now?
We just finished the IT part of the budget discussion, I think.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Jocelyn and group and team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Thanks. Really nice job.
Good job.
Need a moment to set up?
I do. Just one more.
Let's take a couple-minute break, and we'll set up the technology for agenda item C. Brief setup. We had fixed a couple microphones last time, hopefully. This is agenda item C, ID 17-123, Public Works Update, and it had an attachment, which was the 2017 April project report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's see, there's a few things I'd like to cover with council tonight. We're going to talk mostly about kind of pavement preservation or pavement management, and there's a series of things I'd like to cover. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we accomplished last year and specifically this year. As the council's well aware, you made one of the largest financial investments in street maintenance and maybe forever. I'm not sure how back this goes, but certainly a very heavy investment here for 2017. So I'm going to talk about the specifics of what that looks like. One of the pieces I also want to talk about is kind of the public outreach that we're going to do, because in some cases it'll be probably pretty straightforward because it kind of follows historically what we've done with some of our work, but we're about to take on a little bit different approaches, and I want to be able to share with council what we're going to do to help inform our residents about what this new techniques will look like and what to expect. And we're actually going to follow up with a survey, by the way, just a satisfaction survey. I also kind of mentioned in the staff communication, there are a couple of issues that I would like to talk about at later study sessions. Traffic operations and capital. There's actually several issues that Aaron Human's been working on. And remember, he's our new traffic engineer. He's been here a year. We really hadn't had one for, close to 10 years. So Aaron's got a lot on his plate, and I'd like to kind of share some of that he's working on. Also, the sanitary sewer and the storm water utilities. Those two I'd also like to talk about here. I think I've got it scheduled here towards the end of May, specifically the sanitary sewer. I want to make sure that we have some conversation here before the budget about some of our rates, connection charges, and follow up, quite honestly, on the joint meeting we had with the Inglewood Council. I sent out here the other day a summary from the wastewater treatment plant staff, and I want to follow up with council on some of that. So with that, I'm going to move ahead here and talk a little bit about our pavement preservation strategy. I've been before council a couple of times kind of talking about preservation and the need for us to kind of look at multiple techniques. We have historically relied upon overlays to kind of manage a lot of our street maintenance. Everybody enjoys overlays. The only problem with that is we never will be able to afford to overlay our streets in order to stay up on top of the condition of our pavement. Now, if we look at a true preservation strategy, of course, we're going to save money. It's a very systematic approach. It really does provide kind of a very detailed approach to how we manage the work long term. And it does allow us to integrate a lot of the work that we do internally as operations, as well as kind of our capital and construction techniques. You've seen this chart before. This is kind of a chart that shows you when you first pave a street in the very beginning of time. Obviously, the condition is very good. And then obviously over time, the condition starts to deteriorate here rather rapidly. Maybe just a quick comment on this. What we're trying to avoid here is spending a lot of money in the rehab and reconstruction, because that's obviously the most expensive. So the whole point of pavement preservation is to try to capture this in the beginning of the curve before it gets too far down there, and we spend higher cost construction techniques. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. You've seen this in a prior discussion here with council. As you kind of look at the average pavement quality index, it's clear that we should be spending here close to about $4 million, 3.8 here for probably 10 years in order for us to kind of catch up. And once we kind of reach that kind of goal, then we could drop that down to closer to about 2.8 million. So that's kind of the goal in order to achieve a pavement quality index of about 71. If you remember, we're one of the lowest pavement quality indexes here in the Front Range of the metro area. Okay, so this kind of goes to what I was talking about before. As you look at the curve, you got kind of three categories here: routine maintenance, preventative maintenance, and the rehab section. So the routine maintenance, you typically will see kind of larger patching operations, crack sealing, something we did a lot, and I'll touch on that as well here again. Preventative maintenance tends to be some of these other kinds of microsurfacing, slurry seals, fog seals. Those are kinds of things that we historically have not done. that tend to be very cost-effective depending on certain kinds of pavement quality. And then, of course, at the bottom there, this is the heavy mill and overlay and reconstruction. We've done a lot of that as well here.
You said, but the preventative, we've done less of?
Yes, we really haven't done much historically kind of in the middle. And in part because there are, I think, considerations about how this goes down, the time of construction. It is an inconvenience. There are challenges with it, and I'm going to talk about that. There are changes in the industry that kind of minimize some of these problems, but I think historically we have avoided that.
Is that the one that involves the famous toilet paper?
That is what we're going to talk about in routine maintenance. And I'm going to love to talk about the toilet paper a little bit here. So in routine maintenance, we tend to want to focus, quite honestly, where the staff, the internal operations, tends to focus on the heavy patching and the crack sealing. I think we're most cost effective if the staff is focused on our operations, our equipment, and probably in those areas, and that we tend to contract then in the other preventative maintenance and certainly the mill and overlay. Now, we do mill and overlay as a staff operation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But generally speaking, public works operations tend to look at the staff in more of the routine maintenance functions. Okay, so we've all seen kind of the patching operation. I want to give you a couple of examples. This is the kind of the typical crack filling here. We've historically struggled in trying to come up with a reasonable schedule for us to internally do the crack filling, and so that's why last year we did a lot of crack filling by contract. So we're getting to the point where we're trying to catch up with that. So the preventative maintenance, here's where we're getting into some techniques that are going to be different than what we've historically seen around here. And this operation here, people will tend to think of this as chip seal, but it's not. It's a different kind of approach. The operation tends to look similar, but the asphalt, as you can see in the one picture that's being sprayed on the ground, is what they call a rapid set. Then you drop the chip, you roll it, you sweep it, you fog seal again, and then ultimately you stripe that all within a 3-day operation. So there is a challenge making sure that people understand what to expect with this. But in the end, if we're able to provide kind of this asphaltic sealed surface, is kind of a name for it, then it does provide us much more cost-effective approach to managing a lot of our streets. And this typical approach tends to have a little coarser aggregate, and so you tend to focus this more on the kind of the collector streets. And so the coarser aggregate, basically heavier friction, quite honestly, it's a little safer in the winter. So that's why public works operations tend to look at this on the collector streets. So we're proposing a little of that here in this next season, and I'll show you where. Slurry seal, we have done a little of that here. It's been probably over 10 years since we've done this. We're looking at doing some of this in more of the residential sections. This is where you got a pavement condition that's probably fairly decent, where you don't need an overlay, but you truly do need to kind of seal the surface. The ultraviolet tends to break down the asphalt pretty quickly, and so you need to do something to seal that surface here, typically within 7 years. And so slurry seal is a cost-effective way. The aggregate's finer. It tends to be kind of a heavy, coarse sand, and it tends to be much more acceptable in kind of the residential streets. And of course, the heavy mill and overlay, the reconstructions, this is, part of our own operation does these kinds of things. And of course, reconstructions tend to be pretty significant projects. I want to just quickly review what we were able to accomplish last year. We had a budget of $2.6 million in 2016. Quite honestly, that was a pretty heavy budget for us. We placed all sorts of, several tons, obviously, of asphalt. We actually did quite a bit of extensive work in concrete replacement. Arapahoe and Broadway, we took on a pretty substantial project. We're actually going to finish it this year, and I'll show you some pictures of that. We do historically a lot of curb gutter and sidewalk replacement. We also sealed 12.5 miles of roadway with crack sealing. And, of course, 37.5 miles of bathroom tissue were applied. Now, we got a lot of play on the bathroom tissue, and I think we learned it is a typical approach and something that apparently has not been seen a lot here, at least in this end of the metro area. And we are going to write a specification. Quite honestly, it's a little tighter. We did get a few complaints about it. People were concerned about kind of the excess and how it blows into yards. So if it tends to rain, it tends to minimize the problem. But we have in the specifications that we've drafted that if there isn't any rain within 3 days, then we're going to actually sweep that and remove the excess. Plus, we're going to limit the application when we think that it truly is necessary. The whole purpose of it, of course, is that you don't want it to track on vehicles, lift up, and then, of course, get into people's driveways and homes. So there's kind of a trade-off with that. But we're going to be a little more sensitive here this year and not apply 37.5 miles of bathroom tissue.
Kind of too bad, actually.
Actually, I have to say, I think it was a really brilliant, inexpensive solution to what could be a pretty substantial problem. And the weather is what it creates the success or the failure of it. Maybe in the future, it could be, I think helping people to understand what you did, why you did it, and maybe some sort of flyers on doors when you're in an area that's more residential, or, South Park, maybe reaching out to the management company there so that they can get that information out, and so that people, I think there was just a shock of what is this, how did this happen, who did this, and to know why, it really calms fears.
I think it's a great point, and the whole public notification piece of this is pretty critical of a lot of these programs, and I think it's a good comment. We probably do need to help inform that, but we are going to be a little more cautious. I think there is a trade-off, because if we start to have a tracking problem, then I get all sorts of different calls. And so this is a way to truly manage and minimize really inconvenience to a lot of people. So
I think if you put the street superintendent's phone number on all, that problem will solve itself.
Okay.
On the toilet.
Yeah.
Problems, call so-and-so.
Actually, I have the mayor's home phone, but I guess I'll change that.
We just need a better relationship with Ed Green.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so 2017, this is, we now have about a $3.1 million budget here to kind of manage a lot of our capital contract maintenance here. So street rehab specifically, this is the contract amount, $2.5 million. We have another $200,000 roughly here in concrete pavement repairs. The concrete repairs, that tends to be the citywide curb gutter sidewalk removal. And then the city of Centennial, we're actually going to be overlaying a section of Broadway. Part of that is actually within the city of Centennial. So we've worked with the Public Works Department there we'll do the work, they pay us their share. And so that's a $60,000 contribution. I did want to kind of mention the fact that we do a fair amount of in-house overlays, and I don't think I've ever really reported to council the details of that. This is just material costs, but our street department actually in the summer paves a lot. And so we typically, in just material costs, we've got about $335,000 in the budget, just material, not labor. Pie chart kind of shows you, how this is roughly divvied up. I think why I want to show you this is that it's our hope, quite honestly, to minimize here the concrete pavement maintenance that's shown at $350. We've got a few sections on Mineral Avenue, and we're hoping that in about 5 years we minimize that dramatically, and that we can push more to the pavement maintenance. And then quite honestly, we're hoping the mill and overlay, we start reducing some of that. And so again, more to the pavement maintenance, the pavement preservation pieces here.
So question.
Yes.
So if a crack is opened up in the asphalt on a street, how much do you estimate, maybe percentage, I don't know, if it's filled right away as opposed to deferred for 6 months or a year and a half or whatever?
Well, actually, great question. We actually have what we have categorized kind of two types of cracks. One is what we term kind of a major crack repair, and it's kind of interesting where it kind of popped up. There's parts of Southbridge that we spent a lot of money where the actual crack is in excess of 4, 5, 6 inches or more, and it apparently the local discussion with engineers, we're not alone here. There are other parts here of the metro area that experience this. But sometime back in the 90s, there was apparently a batch of asphalt oil specifically, that looked like it was probably not the right mix. And so we're all now paying the price of that. So it expands and contracts at rates that, quite honestly, I very seldom have seen in my career, but that requires a very significant repair. We have not really taken that on for several years. The longer you wait, the worse it is. Now, the more traditional, smaller crack, maybe the size of your finger or less, quite honestly, you need to make an assessment here of your streets, even after you pave within 5 years. You need to make an assessment, seal the cracks, even in a brand new overlaid street. And so we also have seen that the types of soil that we have here in the area is very expansive. It's very clayish. And so if you have poor drainage, you'll see that the curb and gutter will many times pour away. Even in brand new developments, we see that. So Littleton Village is an example where we're watching that carefully. So if you start to see that, and you can see it within the first year, you're gonna have to go in there either by warranty, fix it, or if it's after a year, you're gonna have to go in there and seal that. Otherwise, the water will penetrate that and actually make the condition much worse. So it's one of those things that, quite honestly, we're trying to make a larger inventory of those issues. And through the preservation strategy, we're trying to get out in front of this. So crack filling, quite honestly, is cheap and extremely critical in kind of maintaining your pavement longer term. Because if you wait, you're going into the overlays. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
So-
Mark, what you just described,
Yes.
down on Jameson, if you go from Broadway west on Jameson and get down toward, you're going toward Windermere.
Yes.
On the north side, there's
Yes.
several developments there, and all those residential streets are cracked badly.
Yes.
Is that what you're describing?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and they're not heavily used.
Yes. And I think it's, I think we've been challenged here with resources and really a solid strategy about how to approach this. And so we've let the cracks kind of go over time, and we kind of focus more on the overlays. Well, we got to turn that around. We got to get in front of all these cracks, because that's cheap, relatively speaking. And the more that we do of that, the more we minimize the kind of problems you're describing on Jameson.
So might you set up a citizen input so that things could get on a list?
We certainly take those requests. One of the things about a pavement management system is that you actually do annually an inspection of all the streets. So we actually have a consultant who's working on that system now. And so that the intent of that is we want something in-house. I don't want to hire a consultant every time I go out and try to assess the street.
So this is also the cul-de-sacs and
Correct.
the total dead ends and
Correct.
everything?
Everything. Every
Okay.
street within the inventory. Now, we obviously will take citizen input if they got concerns about it. But what we're trying to do is put into place a system where we assess every year the condition of the streets. And we come up with a rating system so that we can put into a system and then keeps track of where things are at. Plus, then we input all these improvements. So every year we make a series of improvements, and then it tells us, these systems will tell us kind of where is the most logical, cost-effective way to spend your money. So these systems in the end will tell us, as this pie chart shows, it'll tell us really the right balance based on the budget that you have. So we're trying, this is a very typical approach for public works. We just have not implemented those strategies here. So we're trying to move that direction. And this whole pavement management system, I want to emphasize that I want a system that's simple, that we as staff can do. There are a lot of systems out there you can pay a lot of money for and have consultants come in. And, in a much larger city, Aurora, Denver, certainly, okay, those completely make sense probably. But for us, I don't want that. It needs to be simple.
Mark?
Yes.
Looking at the milling and paving
Yeah.
on page 9 there, looks like most of that's in District 3, maybe some in 4. Is there a reason it's all concentrated in one part of town?
Well,
What do we have to do to get it in my district? And Jerry's.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, to get to where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Let's see, what a great question. I try not to concentrate it all in one area, but at the same time, you do want to concentrate, certain areas. So, the efficiencies of location So you're not chasing block by block across the entire city. Sure. And a lot of it does depend on what we see as kind of the existing condition of the pavement. Now, I got to be honest, we're spending more on mill and overlay this year than I would prefer, but we're down on that pavement curve, and so we're trying to catch up a little bit here. So once I have this pavement management system in place here by the end of the year, I can be able to predict for you, kind of on a 5-year time frame about where we really should be spending money. So I can tell people block by block when we will come and what we will do.
Okay.
That's my hope. This is kind of just a list of very specific areas. I've got some maps here I'm going to run through here. So here's kind of a cost estimate of a lot of this stuff so that you can see we're spending about $245,000 in crack sealing. There's a series of overlays that we are going to be doing on Windermere, Mineral Westbound, parts of Broadway, doing a big concrete replacement on Arapahoe on Broadway. I'm just going to kind of show you some of the pictures of this. Here's a schedule of when we hope to go to bid. So we are working on 5 contracts right now to go to bid here. Actually, we have 1 already out, and so the others are right behind that. So in early May, the intent is to get all of this out on contract. Now, we're bidding the crack seal now, but allowing the contractor to start, quite honestly, in the fall. We've already heard from the contractors. They've been doing a lot of research here this winter, and they've just told us they're all booked up. So even if we had gotten the bid out in February, we would not have gotten very competitive bids. So they're telling us, bid it now, allow us to do it in the fall. So we're kind of taking advantage of what we're hearing in the construction industry. And I got another real challenging point is the whole Front Range has got a real challenge with construction and cities trying to get good bids because there is a lot of construction going on. And so these kinds of strategies about bidding early, allow them to do late, quite honestly, is about the only way that we're going to be able to not only get competitive bids, but quite honestly, just get the work done. Okay, so crack seal, we went in here, the trail mark area is another area where we had major crack repair. This is the 6-inch stuff and real wider. So we did all that, we fixed all that, and now we're going in and we're just gonna do the little cracks, the smaller things. So we're gonna finish all that. The intent then would be in the following year, we'd follow with more of a pavement preservation, slurry seal, as an example. Here's an area you can see you've got kind of north of Mineral and east of Santa Fe, Windermere's there on the far east, Ridge on the north. And this is another area of heavy crack fill. The center of this, you can see, this is where the city staff's actually going to go in and do some overlays of the streets. Here's another crack fill area. This here is Windermere on the west, Broadway on the east. And this is, you can see here another area where, again, we're doing some city overlays and the rest is crack filled. Okay, so here's that asphaltic surface seal, as we're calling it. This is the kind of the heavy rock, the heavy chip, and we're looking at South Park. And so there's kind of one long stretch through there. We've done all the crack filling last year. We're going to work with the HOA, Business Park, and we're going to actually chip this area in here and put everything I was describing to you kind of in this 3-day process. Here's a slurry seal. This is in the South Ridge neighborhood. We've got kind of 3 zones here. We do have a contingency, quite honestly, here within this budget here, and we're hoping that some of the bids come in pretty reasonably if we get them out now, and we might add to this. But the intent is an area of Southbridge here. We sealed a lot of the cracks there previously, and so now we're going to follow up with a slurry seal. So you can see there's a routine here. Crack fill, slurry seal, or this asphaltic seal, depending on its classification. We've got 3 major areas where we're going to be doing some overlay, and it's just based on the condition of the pavement. Quite honestly, this is where we're going to have to contract the work. It's pretty substantial, sections of roadway. This is Windermere, basically from Littleton Boulevard all the way north to Bellevue. If you've been on that road, you probably have noticed it's in a need. It's got some heavy issues there. We have, basically, this is kind of an odd one because it is westbound Mineral. Eastbound seems to be fine, but we need to overlay the westbound. So something happened here long term, And it's just quite honestly in the need of an overlay. We've got to deal with that. And then finally, we've got a section of Broadway here that we're going to partner with Centennial, City of Centennial. We do have some concrete replacement. We do have some concrete streets. We worked on this particular intersection partly last year. This is going to finish up some of that. And if you've looked at it, some of the panels have cracked in a pattern that quite honestly is, starting to really fail. And so we need to get in there and actually repair these pretty substantially before they get to the point where they become a real hazard. Mineral Avenue, west of Santa Fe has actually got an interesting pattern there that's becoming a real issue. And again, within 5 years, we hope to fix all that. Okay, finally, public involvement. I've been through this a few times when you're trying to do some new practices, and we must spend a lot of time up front kind of informing our citizens about what to expect. So a lot of the mill and overlay, quite honestly, that's fairly easy. They're used to that. The inconvenience isn't as significant, but you still have a fair amount of work to do. So, we do use door hangers. So prior to any kind of construction activity, we're going to be hanging those on each and individual doors, letting them know what's to expect, what's the schedule, get your car off the street, here's a number to call. We're going to certainly be using our newsletters. I do want to use some citizen satisfaction surveys after the completion of this work, especially in the new stuff that we're going to be doing, the slurry seal, kind of the asphaltic seals. I think I want to make sure that we get feedback about how well that performed for them. And then in many areas, we're going to actually go to the HOAs or the business associations, business parks, and we're going to work with them to, inform their board, get it in their newsletters, do whatever we can in advance here to make sure we're communicating as thoroughly as we can. And then we've actually got a few things on our webpage where, if you remember here, about a year or two ago, we actually have this interactive web page there where all the construction projects are listed. And so you can kind of move through that and you can get more detail about what to expect and who to contact. So we'll continue to do those things, and of course, social media. That's it. So that's the rundown of about, what did I say, $3.1 million.
You spend money fast.
I can't. I've said before, I don't care how much money you give me, I'll spend it, every dime of it.
Any questions of Mark on this?
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Mark, we're adjourned. We adjourned? We're adjourned.
I don't have anything else.
That was easy.
But I'm three-dimensional. You can never crush me from inside out. No, cut to my bones. But I'm still unbreakable. Whoa, I'm still unbreakable. Whoa, I'm still unbreakable. Whoa, I'm still unbreakable. Whoa, I'm still unbreakable. Until forever, as lost as it seems. No, you'll never break me.